You guys, I have so much scrap wood laying around in my garage, not even scraps, full boards of wood. These are all scraps. Up in the rafters, that's all mostly full boards, some scraps left over from other home projects. A full garbage can full of scraps. This is all scraps mostly, I think. Don't judge the mess of my garage. And another garbage bin full of wood scraps. So today we need to start working through this giant pile and get rid of some of it. So let's make some projects.
For this project, I'm using a scrap 1x6 and 2x12 to make a book stack. I know this is not a new idea, but I haven't made one yet, and these turned out so beautiful. I found a book in my house that was a similar width to my 6-inch board and cut 2 pieces of wood that would be the same length. And then I cut one book out of the 2x12 to have some variation in the book sizes. Now, most book stacks you see have a phrase on them, but that is not my style. So instead, I'm using my silicone molds and air dry clay. This mold is Regal Trimmings from Redesigned by Prima, and I got it from Amazon, so I will link that below for you. But you always want to coat the mold with cornstarch so the clay doesn't stick. And then I glued it to the wood edge using my wood glue super glue. I thought that since this was also a super glue, it would work well, and it definitely did. I let the clay dry overnight and then painted the wood and the clay with plaster by Waverly.
You guys, the power is out again at my house. This is the third time in 2 weeks that my power has gone out, and it has been out for hours. It is currently 4:20. It's been out since about 1:30. So it's been out for 3 hours. Supposed to come back on between 5 and 6. I can't wait any longer. I did do some errands and left the house for a little bit, but I need to get these projects done. So I'm in my living room. At least there's like a couple of big windows in here. So we are set up shop in here. I'm gonna try to keep working, and if the light is a little wonky, that's why.
Next, I wanted to add a gold leaf to the clay pieces. I'm using this metal leaf adhesive and gold flakes, also from Amazon and linked in my description box. The way this stuff works is you need to add the glue only where you want the gold leaf to be. I use a detail paintbrush to do this because I didn't want the entire area covered. And then you have to wait for the glue to become tacky. The gold leaf is not going to stick to wet glue. And this takes about 30 minutes or so. Once the glue is tacky, you can add the gold leaf. It's a little hard to see where the glue is once it's dry, but when you hold it towards the light, you can see that it's shiny. Once you have the gold leaf laid down, it looks a little bit messy, so you want to take a paintbrush to get the excess gold leaf off. I know this is not the best angle, a stupid power outage. One thing I've never seen anyone do with these book stacks is make the edges look like pages. I could be wrong there, I just haven't seen anyone do it. So I got out my flexible roller and a fine liner pen to draw lines around the 3 edges of the wood to look even more like books. This was tedious and not necessary, but to me, it's details like this that take a DIY project and make it look high-end and store-bought. After all the lines were added, I took a burlap by Dixie Belle and a chip brush over the edges to make them look a little more used and worn, and that's it for this one. Next, I'm taking this 2x2 and we're making a lantern. Again, this is not an original idea, but some of you may remember this lantern I made last year, and I had wanted to share an idea for Christmas with you on the way that I was decorating it. Unfortunately, that lantern did not hold up, so this time I'm making it out of wood. I cut down 4 pieces at 18 inches long and then 8 pieces at 5 inches long. Also, I cut 4 1-inch pieces, and that you'll see in a little bit. Now to build the lantern, I promise this is a really easy build. I'm taking 2 of the 18-inch pieces and 2 of the 5-inch pieces to make one of the sides. And to attach them, I'm using my wood glue, spreading it out with my finger over the surface to get the best adhesion, and then used my square to make sure the sides are flush before adding a brad nail for an immediate hold. Then it's just a matter of building on the rest of the sides. So I put 4 5-inch pieces on and then added the 2 18-inch pieces on top. Once I had the frame built, I need a top and a bottom. I used a scrap 1x12 and traced the lantern on it and cut that out, and then glued and nailed them in place. Here you can see the bottom is not quite flush with the sides, so I'm going to take a 60 grit sandpaper with my orbital sander to make sure all the edges are flush. This is going to make the lantern look more store-bought instead of handmade. And last, for the build portion, I'm adding these 1-inch pieces to be the tiny cute little feet. Next, I'm painting the lantern in sage. This is not going to be the final color, but instead it's an underlayer. I'm going to use milk paint on top. I've never used milk paint before and learned a few things during this process, which of course we'll get into. But milk paint is a powder that you mix with warm water to create the paint. And depending on how thick you want your paint, the ratio can vary, but typically you want 1 part paint to 1 part water. And when researching, everyone said to use lukewarm water, but I actually found a little hotter water to work better. You also don't want to mix more paint than what you're going to use. This paint does go bad quickly. I also found it was easier to mix it in a smaller container like a cup and use a plastic fork to mix it. You want to mix for about 2 minutes until that powder is dissolved, and then let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes to allow the paint to fully absorb into the water. This first batch was way too thick. My water was not warm enough to dissolve the powder, so I added more water, and then it was too thin. So this certainly is a Goldilocks medium that needs to be just right. And here's where the power went out again. But good news is I figured out how to mix the paint correctly and added 2 more coats. So milk paint is unpredictable and most people use it because they want to get a chippy look. Well, I did something wrong because the paint didn't chip at all whatsoever. You can see slight little cracks, but nothing like I was expecting. So I did some more research and learned if you want that chippy look, you need to apply the milk paint to a slick, non-porous surface, and chalk painted wood is the exact opposite. So we're back to square one. I repainted the lantern in sage, and this time I'm going to add petroleum jelly to select areas so the milk paint doesn't adhere. This time when I added the milk paint, it didn't stick at all to the areas with petroleum jelly. That also wasn't exactly what I wanted. At least we were getting a little bit closer to that chippy look though. Here you can see how the milk paint should react. There are peeling areas that are starting to flake off, and then you'd want to take sandpaper and knock off all that loose paint. If you want to stop the paint from continuing to chip, seal it after sanding, otherwise this piece is done. So even though it put me through hell, it turned out pretty cool. If you have any tips on working with milk paint, leave them in the comments below. I would love to keep playing around with it. You guys, fall is upon us and I am so ready for my favorite time of year. So for this project, I'm taking various widths of 1x and making a pumpkin. Measurements are on the screen, but you want to cut the pieces slightly taller because I'm going to cut the tops down a bit. I drew a tapered shape on one half of the wood pieces, and then I can stack the duplicate pieces and cut them together with my jigsaw so they come out symmetrical. Then I sanded the edges, but I won't bore you with that part. I want there to be a gap between the boards, and I'm going to attach them using macrame cord, but first I need to drill a hole where I want the cord to go, and then paint the boards. I want to see that wood grain peeking through the paint, so I did a whitewash. I also gave the pumpkin a little dimension by lightly dry brushing some curved lines over it. I didn't love how the top of the pumpkin was looking, so I drew a new line on top and recut the pieces so it kind of had a dip in the center where the stem would go, and I think that looks much better. Now we can finally add the macrame cord. I put a piece of tape around the end and put it through the back hole on one piece, and then down through the second hole next to it. And then tied a simple knot in the back and hot glued the knot down so you don't see it through the crack. Next, to help the pumpkin stand on its own, I glued some scrap wood pieces to the back for support. And last, we just need that stem. I had this branch in my stash and I'm going to hot glue it on top. This angle is a little hard to see, but to make it look a little cooler, I got out my natural clay. Yes, the clay I used a few videos back that was an absolute nightmare. I wanted to torture myself and see how it would hold up being wrapped around an object. I mixed up some slip, which is clay and water. This acts as a glue for the clay, so I had some hope here. Then I rolled out the clay and attached it to the stem using the slip and blending it all together. It was looking really nice and I set it aside to dry overnight. It completely cracked and the little pointy pieces broke right off. I should have known that was going to happen. The only part that didn't crack was the part not attached to anything. So strange. But I redid the stem with my Crayola air dry clay and got the exact same result. So I ended up just filling in the cracks with some spackle and painting it. This project is not a mostly wood piece like the others, but I still wanted to include it. I'm reusing this wood frame from an old project that I no longer use and making a fall wall art piece. I first painted the frame white and then I want to add a fabric background. This striped fabric is from Dollar Tree and I'm going to add it to a piece of foam core board. I'm using my DIY liquid patina to attach the fabric and added a thin coat to the foam core board going section by section since this stuff dries pretty quickly. I did not put the liquid patina on top of the fabric as well, only under it. And then cut the corners out and hot glued the excess fabric down to the back. For the art piece, I got this idea from Pinterest where I saw someone made pumpkins out of doilies and thought it was so cute. I picked these ones up from Dollar Tree and kept one its regular size and painted it in the color Pumpkin by Waverly. Then I cut the second one a little bit smaller and painted it sage. I also cut out some regular poster board and painted it in the same colors to fit under the doilies and hot glued them together and then to the fabric. For the stems of the pumpkins, I'm using aluminum foil. I bunched it together and shaped it to look like a fancy, whimsical stem. And then painted it with Fawn by Waverly, then added a dark wax on top. But you can still see that foil peeking through a little bit. Once that was dry, I glued it to the pumpkins, and that's it for this one. More of a Dollar Tree DIY than scrap wood, but it's super cute.